The Convention on Standards of Training, Certification and Watchkeeping, or STCW, was first adopted in 1978, with some important amendments over the years, notably in 1995. When first agreed, it established firm sets of rules and working practices to apply to all shipping operations globally. Today, through the 1995 amendments, and with best practice being encouraged throughout the industry, STCW ensures that competencies are rigorously taught and recognised, making sure that a job description truly reflects the person's competence through carefully structured training, minimum standards and certification. And because of this philosophy, STCW remains the benchmark for an efficient and reliable maritime industry, with safety and environmental protection at its heart. However, new technological, economic and environmental demands and security issues have made substantial changes to the Convention necessary, resulting in an agreement that reflects the needs and challenges of the 21st century. STCW 2010, the Manila Amendments. It was at the invitation of the Philippine government that the IMO decided on gathering in Manila for what would prove to be a landmark convention. It's appropriate that this event should be staged here, as the great majority of seafarers originate in the Philippines and they are recognised as a major player in the maritime industry. June 2010 was an important date in the life of STCW. Since 2007, the IMO has been drafting new text, removing inconsistencies and debating key issues. The diplomatic conference in Manila confirmed the revised text of STCW, drafted further amendments and structures that would make it a document fit for purpose for the foreseeable future, coming into force on January the 1st, 2012, and with a transitional period until January the 1st, 2017. It considered in detail issues that are crucial to seafarers, ship owners, operators, training institutions, flag states and other parties. Amongst the amendments adopted, there are a number of important changes to each chapter of the Convention and Code, including improved measures to prevent fraudulent practices associated with certificates of competency and strengthening of the evaluation process. New requirements for the prevention of drug and alcohol abuse. Updated standard relating to medical fitness of seafarers. New training requirements focusing on the marine environment, navigating in polar waters, teamwork and leadership. An emphasis on new methods of training, including distance learning and web-based learning. New training guidance for personnel operating dynamic positioning systems.
Recent developments and challenges in shipping, new types of ships, new areas of IMO's focus make it responsive to modern challenges. Security, for example, piracy, for example, new types of ships that have come in the industry, liquefied natural gas ships. These all needed an updating of the conference, which is what we tried to do and what we succeeded doing in Manila.
The conference introduced many changes, and in this programme we'll look at some of the key issues highlighted by the updated STCW. We'll begin by looking at new certification and refresher training, and how this affects all able seafarers on deck and engine room ratings. We then look at safety culture on board, with particular emphasis on the importance of sound leadership and teamwork. Before turning to tanker training and the issues arising from the many different cargoes carried and their potential hazards. Then security and the current concerns raised by international piracy and armed robbery. Tackling the issue of fatigue by setting universally recognised minimum rest hour periods. And finally, the importance of recognising the role of the port state and the need for accurate record keeping and the maintenance of certification.
What the conference has done really is to enhance the standards behind the certificate. so that new technology is introduced, new ways of thinking have been introduced. In particular, things like leadership training, training on handling piracy, training on how to use ECDIS beneficially, because it isn't just all benefits. There are the problems that arise when you're handling some of this new technology, and the training will have to be introduced, which introduces the problems as well as the good points.
A significant development to STCW rules is a 5-yearly requirement to provide evidence of having maintained the necessary standards of competence in basic training. Onboard training has long been the accepted means of maintaining standards and continues to be so, but there are some areas of basic training that cannot be carried out on board. Refresher courses therefore might have to be conducted ashore. The downside of this is the probable cost for the industry and the need for all personnel to carry additional certification or evidence of training for inspection by port state authorities. However, on the plus side, the industry will be assured that its workforce has proven competence through a comprehensive training program. Many academies will be consulted when designing such refresher courses. One such, the Maritime Academy of Asia and the Pacific, or MARP, was established in 1998, offering courses in all aspects of maritime operations and state-of-the-art facilities and simulators. As refresher training becomes more commonplace, so academies such as this will need to provide the answers.
Well, they come here to ask us to develop courses for refresher training, because it is, although it is not yet a full requirement of STCW, but they are already implementing the refresher training that is expected to be implemented. So they are asking us to develop these courses, and once this is approved by the company, then we conduct this refresher course, like firefighting and first aid and survival training.
It's welcome that certification as Chief Engineer Officer can now be achieved 12 months earlier, depending on certain requirements specified in Regulation 3.2 and Section A 3.2 of the STCW Code. This reflects good resource management, but is also a way of retaining and recruiting good staff and enhancing motivation. New to STCW is the introduction of internationally recognized certification for electrotechnical officers, ETOs, and electrotechnical ratings. It's important to note that STCW is not a manning convention, and therefore a ship's safe manning arrangements will determine whether an electrotechnical officer and/or rating are required, not STCW. On the bridge, technology continues to transform traditional navigation systems, not least with the mandatory requirement for the carriage of ECDIS, gradually coming into force. STCW has responded to other IMO developments and has enhanced ECDIS training, while still ensuring that all bridge watchkeepers maintain a knowledge of the principles of navigation.
What we try to do through looking after the enhancement and updating of the standards of training and watchkeeping for seafarers is to enable them to play their role, to eliminate both sources of pollution of the environment. Operational, through knowing what they should and what they should not allow to escape in the marine environment, and through accidental efforts to ensure that ships do not collide with each other, ships do not go aground.
From the 1st of January 2012, certified able seafarers might be considered part of the safe manning requirements for most ships. Regulation will specify the skills and competencies underpinning knowledge, and is a requirement that has been recently transferred from ILO jurisdiction to that of the IMO.
We are all in favor of the new STCW 2010 in terms of improving the training standards worldwide. There were quite a few things missing in STCW in 95, some things like the bridge team exercises and ship handling simulators, etc., which have now come into STCW, and that I think is a big welcome change for us.
Clearly, everybody in their own mind sees senior staff, including the ship's master, as leaders. It's important that those leaders have training in those aspects of their leadership, but also awareness of the team input, and need to be aware and receptive to the effect that their leadership is having, and also the views, opinions and experience of those within their crews.
Leadership is a skill, with training for it essential. Ships and their cargoes operate in one of the most heavily protected working environments, placing ever greater demands on owners, managers and seafarers. Therefore, the shipping industry must focus on the qualities of team leadership and effective resource management, which it needs to promote and apply through rigorous leadership training. This applies equally to ship-based and shore-based staff. The master must ensure that the officers and crew navigate and run the ship in a safe manner, applying best practice at all times and making the best use of the skills available to them. Resource management requires good leadership, mobilizing every skill and ability of the crew to ensure safe and efficient operations.
It's instilling a culture within an organisation that says that the approach to safety is not a paper exercise or a nominal exercise. It is something that is actively supported by all on board, often reinforced with positive effects on people who take measures and steps that might be seen to be raising a concern, but based on the need to promote safety.
The industry was pretty much wanting more into STCW to make it more mandatory, and I think that the tankers already are sort of given more attention by the ship owners, ship managers, and by bringing it the relevant portions into as mandatory, I think that will it'll improve the standard worldwide.
The most important part of tanker operations is to avoid accidents from taking place. It is a volatile environment, and the records show what can happen when things go wrong. Effective tanker training is designed to avoid any such incident and ensure safe operations. Basic and advanced training tables for officers and crew on board oil, chemical and gas tankers have been developed to enable more specific training programs relating to their particular type of vessel. This is a substantial change to what is contained in the STCW 95 text, and there is a move to competence-based tables which aligns the tanker training structure with that for deck and engine officers. This is effectively finishing the job from 1995. What is also new for tankers is a 1-month accelerated tanker training scheme. It allows for certification after a minimum of 1 month rather than 3 months, subject to the fulfillment of certain criteria. This will assist companies to put in place the correct training of crew for tankers, and seafarers will benefit from being able to gain qualifications more quickly than previously. Ships carrying oil, chemicals or gas differ considerably, with very specific fire control, safety and evacuation procedures for every type of vessel. It's very important that crew can prove accredited competence for their type of vessel. The emphasis of tanker training must be focused on avoiding a crisis before it happens. And to achieve that accreditation, every candidate for certification in basic training for oil and chemical tanker cargo operations needs to demonstrate the required standard of competence in all areas of operation, such as safe cargo operations on tankers, taking precautions to prevent hazards, applying occupational health and safety measures, making considered risk assessments, knowledge of properties of cargo, flammability, corrosiveness, etc., carrying out firefighting operations, taking the necessary precautions to prevent pollution from the release of oil or chemicals. And these examples are only a small part of a very comprehensive package of mandatory requirements.
The general certificate of competency does not go too deeply into any one ship specific type of ship, and by bringing in the additional cargo endorsements, the dangerous cargo endorsements, we end up adding that extra layers of information or knowledge that the seafarer requires for these dangerous ship types. Huge problem. It's causing people to choose not to come out to sea. The youngsters, when they see newspaper stories about people held up for 100 days and 200 days, it's affected our recruitment drive. It is affecting the stress levels on board dramatically, and there are seafarers who say we will not join any ship which is going to go through the Gulf of Aden.
Piracy and armed robbery is a worldwide problem that is increasing in frequency, with much controversy surrounding an effective and universally acceptable means of countering such attacks. It's very difficult for any merchant ship to outrun armed pirates in speedboats. In the case of armed robbery, this often takes place when the vessel is tied up in port. Many operators have put in place passive methods such as CCTV, fire hoses and overboard obstructions in an attempt to hinder an attempted boarding. There are now 4 levels of security training outlined in Chapter 6 of STCW. Included is the consideration of security elements related to piracy and armed robbery. This demonstrates an amendment to STCW directly required by current events. These are security awareness training for all seafarers, security made part of standard familiarization training, training of seafarers with designated security duties, Ship Security Officer certification. Piracy and armed robbery is perhaps one of the most difficult problems facing the maritime industry today. Until piracy is driven off the seas, crews should follow the latest STCW training requirements, apply good leadership, and be vigilant at all times. STCW has long been known for dictating the minimum standards of fitness for duty, including minimum rest hour periods. The new STCW requirements on this issue are now harmonised with the corresponding provisions of the International Labour Organization in its Convention 180, the Seafarers' Hours of Work, the Manning of Ships Convention 1996, and the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, which also dictate minimum rest hour periods. The STCW review ensured harmonisation, and from the 1st of January 2012, the following will be required: a minimum of 77 hours of rest in any 7-day period, a minimum of 10 hours of rest in any 24-hour period, not split into more than 2 periods, one of which must be 6 consecutive hours, while the interval between periods must not be more than 14 hours. The requirement for recording and monitoring hours of work and rest will be strictly enforced, and there is now widened scope of application.
The fundamental question that had to be answered was whether there should be any flexibility in the hours of work and rest to cope with the sort of situations where a master or an officer has to work beyond the normal hours simply because of the operation of the ship. We were concerned that if there was no flexibility built in, then there was a possibility that if the ship did have to work these extra hours, the seafarer himself could be penalised.
In addition, STCW introduced the provision of a new exception clause. Any exception must always allow a minimum of 70 hours rest in any 7-day period. With weekly exceptions, the minimum of 77 hours to 70 hours cannot be used for more than 2 consecutive weeks. The intervals between 2 periods of exceptions shall not be less than twice the duration of the exception. That is, if 2 weeks of exceptions are used, they cannot be used for a further 4 weeks. Daily exception allowing the 10 hours to be split into 3 periods. One must be 6 hours in length, the other 2 must be a minimum of 1 hour in length. And they can only be used for 2 24-hour periods in a 7-day period.
Now we do have an element of flexibility which has been commonly agreed by everybody now. And that we think is a major step forward as protection for the seafarer. We're not in any way looking to work seafarers extra hours. What we're looking for is to ensure when they have to work extra hours that they don't get penalised for doing so.
The STCW was put in place to establish mandatory minimum standards for training, certification and watchkeeping of personnel throughout the international maritime industry. Port state authorities around the world monitor ships' compliance with the STCW requirements by rigorously inspecting a vessel's crew records and also scrutinising certification and records kept on board. In a move to prevent fraudulent practices associated with certificates of competency and strengthen the evaluation process, the conference introduced improved control measures for monitoring of parties' compliance within the convention. In addition, port state inspectors will especially be looking for proof of fitness for duty, most importantly, the record of the hours of work and rest. While previously it was possible to provide an overview statement of certification for individual seafarers, new requirements for refresher training specify that all certificates and proof of training courses completed must be provided. Paperwork can never be popular, but it must be remembered that record keeping and accreditation is probably STCW's most powerful weapon for ensuring that the maritime industry remains the safest and most efficient global transport system. The message of STCW 2010 is that maintaining and improving standards worldwide is dependent on training. The presence of training ships hosting visitors during the conference testified to the importance of marine education and the role that academies throughout the world play in setting industry-wide standards of excellence for the world-class seafarers of tomorrow. The Manila Conference of 2010 was an historic event. It not only recognized the enormous contribution that the Philippines give in manpower, but also in their advanced standards of training and skills. In a move that sealed the IMO's appreciation of the role the seafarer, and importantly their families, play, it was decided to designate the final day of the conference, June the 25th, to be known as the Day of the Seafarer, to be marked every year on that date. The adoption of the revised STCW brought to an end a very successful conference, where agreement was universally reached by consensus. Proof that government, industry, seafarer representative bodies, maritime academies and many other organisations are determined to make the shipping industry the safest in the world.
During this, the year of the seafarer, where we have set 3 main objectives. One, to increase the awareness among the wider public of the indispensable services that seafarers render. Second, to send to the seafarers themselves a clear and strong message that we do recognize their services. We do appreciate the unique conditions under which they render their services. And thirdly, to intensify our efforts within this organization to improve their status in the regulatory arena of the organization. The STCW conference, and the successful outcome of the conference being the pinnacle of our efforts in the regulatory regime.